I was trying to come up with it one night over uh, uh, winter break because this is what I was planning for the next semester as a surprise for the teacher. And so I'm staying up late and I'm doing all this stuff. I've got all these note cards and sheets out, and I'm watching TV in the background, and I'm watching Cast a Deadly Spell, which was out on HBO. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it stars Fred Ward. It's got Julianne Moore in it. Clancy Brown is the villain, and David Warner is also in it as well. And it's an urban fantasy that is set in post-World War II Los Angeles. So it's a hard-boiled private eye thing, but it's hard-boiled private eye meets Cthulhu. And at one point, this kind of thug of a villain shows up and tells the protagonist, Harry wants to see you. Harry wants to see you. And it's kind of like this long drawn out, kind of mid-Atlantic accent, Harry. And it just stuck in my head when I was trying to come up with a name. And I'm like, listen, I've got a wizard here. I've got to name him after somebody. He's going to be in the real world, so he needs a real world name. But real world wizards don't have names. But we do have magicians. And we have Harry Houdini. We have Harry Blackstone, who were a couple of the first big magicians. So I'm like, okay, Harry will be his first name. And then after that movie was over, I found late episodes of Babylon 5 playing, and Bruce Boxleitner with that gravelly voice was up there talking about different military atrocities that had happened in history as part of this line. And he's going down doing a list of these things, and one of them he says is Dresdin. So it was Harry Dresdin. It's like, ooh, yeah, that's a solid name. I'll do it like that. So he became Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresdin. A guy named him after a bunch of magicians and a fire. Which I was not being terribly sensitive at that time. I was about 24, and I thought I knew a whole lot more than I did. When I first wrote the first couple of chapters to the first Dresden book and brought them into my teacher, she read them, and she reads them. She stacks up the papers. She puts them down on her desk and looks at me and says, "You did it." And I said, "What?" She said, "You've been working with me for 3 years. You've finally written something that is of professional quality. I don't know if you'll sell this first, but you'll be able to sell this. You did it. Now, go out, come back next week with an outline for the rest of it." And she meant the rest of the novel. But I came back the next week with sketch outlines of 20 books, plus a 3-book trilogy, like a big 3-book capstone trilogy to finish the end of it, of double-sized books, And I came back and brought that to her. I started talking about it, and I just babbled about it for a good 20 minutes. I remember the look on her face now. And the look on her face was, I finally gotten this kid on board. I don't want to throw him off track now. So she just kind of sat there nodding and listening. And I get to the end of it. And I'm like, what do you think? And she says, I think if you can sell a 23-book series, you should be fine. She didn't want to tell me there's no chance you're going to be able to do that coming out the gate. And because I didn't know that, I kind of did it. I started off with a 3-book contract, and I'd already had 2.5 of the books written, when I started off. So those first 3 books came out, bam, bam, bam. And people liked them. They kind of took off. Well, the first thing that I established, I think, was that Dresden was not a fancy went to college wizard. I based his magic not on sort of the esoteric magic that you see from the major wizard figures, but upon I said, what if he was a wizard who was a plumber? What if he was a wizard who was an engineer? And so I assigned a couple of basic things to the magic to get him started off with, and then so he had the ability to create gadgets and stuff like that could be helpful during his investigations. And then I made him the sort of investigator who got places by being inadvisedly intrepid and too stubborn to quit. So, when he showed up and got beaten up, that was not anything that was really going to be more than a speed bump for him. He was that kind of character because he'd had an 18 constitution, but that was the thing that I wanted for him. I wanted to be somebody who absolutely doggedly would not give up. Which also happened to dovetail well with, it took me 10 years to break into fantasy, or to break into fiction. So that also dovetailed well with who I needed to be in order to get to where I was going. And then he had to be somebody who paid attention to his magic, to his craft, which was also something I needed to develop. And as a result, I kind of had this character who, would show up, lip off a lot, was willing to fight anybody if he needed to, and who was, if not super intelligent, at least very clever and resourceful. So he was the sort of guy who he's really great to have on your team, and an almighty pain in the ass if he's not. And that was kind of who I wanted to make. I wanted to make this very strong individualistic character, and so his approach to solving crimes was basically, okay, I've got to come at this from my angle with my strength. And it really isn't fair to have a private eye who can call up a demon and say, I need some information, I'm willing to trade a bit for it. I had, I think, the first 5 Dresden books out, and my editor came and sat me down at a table at a con. We went to dinner, and she's like, listen, they've just put me in charge of finding authors for Spider-Man novels, and I was wondering if you, and I said, yes. She's like, I haven't gotten to the offer of the money yet. I said, don't care, it's Spider-Man. And she was like, okay, are you sure you want to do it? I'm like, absolutely. It's like, all right, let's get a story together and we'll talk to Marvel. And so I got to write a story about Spidey, who's my favorite superhero. Dresdin makes a lot of Spider-Man jokes along the way. And but Spidey was always my number one guy in comics, and I bought every Spider-Man comic for a good 6 or 7 years. And that was when they had like 4 different ones coming out every month too. So getting to sit down with that character and write it, and being able to take things that from the Spider-Man stories that the folks at Marvel hadn't exactly brought out. There's so many similarities between Spider-Man and the Rhino, and to be able to have the Rhino sitting on Aunt May's couch having tea was the funnest thing that I did. And because I was such a huge Babylon 5 fan, I looked at all the stories that Straczynski had done for Marvel, for Spider-Man. And so I was like, you know what? I love these stories. I love these villains. I'm gonna borrow these from JMS and put them in this book. And I just had a great time doing it. Spider-Man was, I had to write. That was the only year that I've done 3 books, and I had to do 3 books in 9 months. And and it was a labor of love, and it was a lot of late nights, and at times very difficult. And then I got to the end of the Spider-Man book, and it wasn't quite long enough to suit him. And so I'm like, okay, well, I can change the story and make it a little more complicated, add in some characters and make it longer. And my editor looked at me and said, nope, we're not allowed to do that, because we would have to send it to the Marvel committee to approve, and they only get together every so often, and we've got to have the story to them by then. So I'm like, well, what am I going to do? And I sat down and thought to myself, if this was, try and think of this outside, the box of writing a superhero, science fiction story. What would you be doing if this was a romance novel? And I said to myself, I'd write more orgasms. That would make the story longer to make the audience happy. And so I said, okay, this is a superhero novel, so I'm going to write more kapow. And so I went back in and just wrote more fight scenes into the story to lengthen it. It was fun to just imagine it, because it was all stuff that I hadn't been able to do before. And I had grown up on comic books so much. I had a friend. I had like a best friend, and every week we would go to the comic book store, and we would buy all the new comics that we wanted. And between the 2 of us, we would get them all. And then we'd go to Burger King and sit there for hours when they had their 5 hamburgers, 5 small fries for $5 deal. And we would eat 5 hamburgers and 5 small fries and read all the comics, on Saturdays after we got done with work during the week. Over the summer, I worked at a summer camp where I worked with horses. And that was such an incredibly fun part of my life. I look back on that as, there's some things that just sort of stand out as golden in your teenage years. And that for me, reading those comics with my best friend was one of them. And so I got to reach back to those days and to those talks that we would have, and all the discussions we would have about the various superpowers and so on, and be like, well, yeah, Hulk can punch you with 100 tons of force, but he still only weighs 1,200 pounds. So if he throws too much weight, he's going to throw himself away from you. Whereas Spider-Man, he gets to stick to the ground. He can put all 10 tons of force into every punch that he can throw. So that's why he can hang out with these guys. And so I was able to kind of go through it and add those things in. My Spider-Man nerd, my nerd joy into the story, and now it's kind of canon, so I like it now. For Cinder Spires, yeah, I'll be writing the next book. I'm not sure what the title of that one is yet, but I'll be getting started on it as soon as I'm done with the next Dresdin. The next Dresdin is about 10% done now. and it should proceed at about 6 to 8% per work week. So I should get that done in 16 to 18 weeks of work. Right now, I'm editing the Olympian affair, sort of a political / intrigue book. There's a lot of duels. We get to go to the surface and see what that's like. We get to see characters from different places and go to a different spire and see sort of a different society there. We get to kind of warm up this war that started getting started in the last one, and it'll kind of overflow thanks to the events of this book. And we remain with talking cats as heroes in a big section of the story. Which seems to be all anybody cares about in this series. But what about the cats? There's a human level intelligence dog in the Dresdin Files who is an extremely popular character and who I have to use very sparingly or he will steal every scene. So when I started writing the Cinder Spires, I was like, you know what? Cat owners are even nuttier about cats than dog owners are about dogs, because at least dog owners have got kind of this practical background there somewhere. Cats are completely fanciful, and they would fit really well in this world that I've made. So I kind of got that all sorted out, and then figured out how I was going to have cat society exist. And when I started writing, I never actually owned a cat of my own, and I didn't really know cats, but I knew cat owners. So I had a bunch of friends who were nutty about cats, and I knew exactly what they would want to read about. And now I have a cat of my own, so I can get involved even more. I've got a little 5-pound cat that bosses around my 100-pound pit bull. And I don't know how he does it, but he is in charge. The dog is the lowest on the totem pole. The cat tells him what to do. I have to do some work. They're reissuing Aeronaut's Windlass, the first book in the series. So I'm doing a little bit of work on that. They're doing like new covers and stuff like that to update things.